For most of us, finding food is the easiest part of the day. A grocery store is never far away, and if we're hungry, we simply open the refrigerator or order a meal with a few taps on a screen. But now imagine a world where none of that exists. No farms, no markets, no bread, no rice. Not even a single field planted by human hands. This was the world our ancestors called home for hundreds of thousands of years. Every sunrise came with the same question. You, would they find food today or go to sleep hungry? There were no guarantees. A failed hunt, a dry season, or one wrong decision could mean starvation. Yet despite living in a world this unforgiving, humans didn't just survive. They spread across nearly every continent on Earth, long before agriculture ever appeared. So what kept them alive for so long? Was it hunting giant animals? Was it eating wild plants? Or was the real secret something far more unexpected? To answer that, we first have to forget everything we think we know about the prehistoric diet. The biggest misconception about prehistoric food is that there was one universal diet. There wasn't. There was no single menu that every early human followed. In fact, two groups living just a few hundred miles apart could eat completely different foods simply because they lived in different environments. If you lived along a coastline, the ocean became your pantry. Fish, shellfish, crabs, and seaweed could provide reliable nutrition throughout much of the year. In dense forests, the menu looked completely different. Wild berries, nuts, mushrooms, leafy plants, and edible roots were often just as important as meat. Small animals like rabbits, birds, and turtles were far more common than the giant creatures we usually imagine. A single failed hunt could waste enormous amounts of energy, making hunting a risky investment rather than a guaranteed reward. That is why gathering was just as important as hunting. While some members of the group tracked animals, others searched for fruits, seeds, roots, and edible plants. These foods may not seem exciting today, but they provided dependable calories when hunting failed. In many prehistoric communities, gathering likely supplied a large share of the group's daily food. Seasonal change also shaped everything. Spring offered fresh shoots and bird eggs. Summer brought fruits and berries. Autumn was the time for nuts and seeds rich in fat. Winter forced people to rely on preserved knowledge, hidden roots, fishing, or whatever animals they could find. Instead of fighting nature, early humans adapted to it. That adaptability became their greatest advantage. Unlike most animals, which survive on a narrow range of foods, humans learned to eat hundreds of different plants and animals across countless environments. From insects and shellfish to roots and wild fruit, almost everything was considered a potential food source if it could keep the group alive. But this incredible flexibility came with a serious problem. Finding food was difficult. Knowing whether it was safe to eat was even harder. For early humans, hunger wasn't always the greatest danger. Sometimes, the greatest danger was the food itself. A bright berry could be poisonous. A mushroom that looked perfectly edible might contain deadly toxins. Even roots and seeds that were rich in nutrients could be harmful if they were eaten raw. One mistake was often enough, and there were no doctors, no medicine, and no second chances. Survival depended on knowledge just as much as it depended on finding food. Over countless generations, people learned to recognize subtle differences between safe and dangerous plants. They discovered that some roots had to be roasted before eating, others needed to be soaked in water to remove bitter kestis. Tin seeds had to be ground or cooked before the body could digest them safely. The same was true for animals. A successful hunt didn't mean every part of the animal was equally valuable. Early humans quickly learned that the fattiest parts were often the most important. Bone marrow, hidden inside thick bones, was packed with calories. Organs like the liver and heart contained nutrients that muscle meat alone couldn't provide. While modern diets often focus on lean meat, prehistoric hunters understood something different. In the wild, fat was survival. This is why archaeologists frequently find ancient bones deliberately smashed open. It wasn't random damage. It was evidence of people extracting every last bit of nourishment from an animal. Nothing useful was wasted. Knowledge like this couldn't be invented overnight. It had to be passed from one generation to the next through observation, experience, and sometimes painful failure. Every edible plant, every poisonous berry, every dangerous mushroom represented lessons learned over thousands of years. In many ways, this invisible knowledge became humanity's greatest survival tool. Strength could help you catch food, but wisdom determined whether that food would keep you alive. And once humans understood nature well enough to predict where food could be found, they began asking an entirely different question. What if food didn't have to be searched for at all? For hundreds of thousands of years, hunting and gathering worked. It wasn't easy, but it allowed humans to spread across almost every continent on Earth. So why did they stop? Around 10,000 years ago, the climate became warmer and more stable after the last ice age. In many regions, wild grasses began growing in the same places year after year. People noticed something remarkable. Seeds that fell to the ground would grow into new plants. At first, this wasn't farming. Early humans simply returned to places where food grew naturally and began collecting seeds from the strongest plants. Over generations, those small decisions slowly changed the landscape. Without realizing it, humans were domesticating nature. For the first time, food no longer had to be chased across the wilderness. It could be grown. That single change transformed everything. Families settled instead of constantly moving. Villages appeared. Food could be stored through harsh seasons, allowing populations to grow faster than ever before. But the new lifestyle came with a hidden cost. Hunter-gatherers had eaten hundreds of different plants and animals depending on the season. Farmers increasingly relied on only a handful of crops like wheat, rice, or barley. Archaeologists have found evidence that some of the earliest farming communities were shorter, suffered more tooth decay, and experienced more disease than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. Agriculture wasn't simply an upgrade. It was a trade-off. Humans exchanged dietary diversity for food security. They sacrificed mobility for stability. And although individuals may not have become healthier, civilization itself became possible. From that moment on, the story of human food would never be the same again. So, what did humans eat before agriculture? The real answer isn't a single food or even a specific diet. It was adaptability. Our ancestors survived because they learned to eat whatever their environment could provide. They observed nature, shared knowledge across generations, and adjusted with every changing season. That flexibility became one of humanity's greatest strengths, and it helped our species survive long before the first farm ever existed. But this leaves us with an even bigger mystery. If prehistoric people depended on hundreds of wild plants for survival, how did they know which ones were safe and which ones were deadly? Because without books, laboratories, or warning labels, someone had to discover every poisonous plant the hard way. And that's the story we'll explore in the next video.